One of the documents you've shown me, Michael, is a list of payments from this incorporated association. Vast amounts of cash withdrawals, which have never been recovered, almost every week or more often than that. Several $1,000s is taken out without explanation, just cash. And it seems to me that one of the things that Alan Jones referred to was that in the Parliament there are about 55 members of Parliament who have union backgrounds. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that any of these would have been doing the same thing, but it seems an obvious sense. It's obviously in the public interest, to use that phrase which is bandied about in media matters. It seems to be in the public interest that union officials be subjected to exactly the same duties and responsibilities as directors, particularly in relation to their own affairs, but also in relation to their obvious duty to take action, both civilly and criminally, in relation to funds which are stolen from the union.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. One gentleman who's on the side of the angels here is the former Attorney General Robert McClelland. He has done a tremendous body of work on the existing fiduciary responsibility that union officials owe to their unions, and it is substantial. So I would think that at present the current legal framework wants for enforcement, and it wants for enforcement action against individuals. It is not satisfactory to have, in fact, let me illustrate it this way. If you were to say to Ms. Gillard and to the ABC and to Fairfax, we have a wonderful idea for enforcement in the corporate world, and that is to have the Institute of Company Directors responsible for the enforcement of all securities and other company-related matters. They would laugh at you. They would say, you've got to be joking. We're just not going to have Dracula in charge of the blood bank. Thank you very much. We'll turn that around. At present, we've got Fair Work Australia stacked with union officials responsible for the administration or the enforcement of union-related affairs. Now, clearly, that has insufficient motivation. It has far too many owed allegiances, favours, whatever you want to, whatever your suspicious mind may lead you to conclude is the reason for the absence of enforcement. There are far too many potential conflicts of interest in having that union stacked body responsible for the enforcement of fiduciary obligations that union officials may hold at present. So I think what needs to happen is that what McClelland has to say about the currently existing in common law and various statute obligations that union officials owe to their unions to their members from a fiduciary perspective, that ought to be tightened up a little, ought to be made a lot clearer, ought to be modelled along the same lines as the very clear obligations for company directors are modelled, and then the reporting of that ought to be much more open and again I think modelled along the same lines as company directors. And we should have an immediate and instant recoil when we see somebody like Tony Sheldon from the Transport Workers Union stand up and say, well, I am going to withhold $200,000 in support for the Labor Party if you, Julia Gillard, do not do A, B, C or D. Again, let's reverse that. Let's imagine that a building developer had said, I've got $200,000 here, but unless you approve my application for rezoning of this land that I own, you're not going to get the 200 grand. No. That's what the unions do, and they get away with it. Unless you, Julia Gillard, do what we say, then we're not going to give you further electoral funding. When you reverse it, you see it clearly and you go, oh, yeah, that's so stupid. How can it be that we have this peculiar class of person in Australia, the union official, who is able to exercise such wide discretion over how his or her members' money is spent to make those sorts of public statements, and even if they're just threats, they're pretty effective. You know, he certainly gets in front of the cameras. How can that be? How can it be right? How then can it be right that Michael Williamson could, on behalf of his members, so fail them as to look at Thompson's course of conduct and say, no, this isn't a matter for police? And similarly, Mr Ludwig, Bill, come on, geez. How could you look, in just 1994, when Wilson's in Melbourne, there's only 2 blokes who knew about this account, Blewett and Wilson. Only 2. 2 signatories, Blewett and Wilson, set up by Julia Gillard, the girlfriend of one of them. And in weeks, 6, 8, 6,000 bucks, 8,000, 5,000, 4,000, 4,000, 4,000, every few days. I looked at Thompson's ATM accounts. Gee whiz. They didn't even bother getting an ATM card. They had the cash cheques from the chequebook. But he tell him must have seen him coming and just go, oh, look out, get the Calico bag. Here comes Bruce. Here comes Ralph. Huge amounts of money. Where'd it go? There's been no examination of these blokes as to where this cash went. And if, you know, Bob Kernahan gave me this badge. It's an AWU badge, and I'll wear it with pride. Not to represent the interests of the entrenched bloody rulers of the union, Bill Ludwig and those, but the blokes, the people, the men and women who do the work, you know. My old man was a worker. He was a fitter and turner in the railways for 40 years. Gee whiz, the stories of my dad with the blokes that he worked with, real men, you know, solid people, men of character, men who would no more allow somebody to rip off the tea money than fly to the moon. You know, they would bloody tar and feather a bloke who ripped him off. One of us stole money from us. That's an anathema. The bloke would be drummed out. Dad would speak with great fondness about, you know, when he went to Everleigh Railway Yards here in Sydney in the 50s for his apprenticeship, and an older tradesman would leave on his last day with a Globite bag and impeccably dressed. Those tradesmen would come to work beautifully dressed and change into their overalls and go home, you know, for a beer on the way home, but always beautifully dressed. And they'd walk along the railway line, Dad said, on their last day, a bloke who was leaving, and everybody in the Everleigh Yards would be there with a long-handled tool, tapping the railway line, standing shoulder to shoulder, as this bloke, tears streaming down his face, would walk down the line of his mates, his comrades, the blokes that he'd worked with. That, to me, is what unionism is about. That's about mateship and about looking out for each other, making sure the workplace is safe. It is not about these smart-ass, with great respect to you, Professor, loyally types who infiltrate the ranks. You know, I won't name them, but because it'll take me too bloody long. And then seek to use the funds generated in the unions as some great power tool, as some means to exercise and project my power and my influence and what have you. Not for what the unions were intended for, which is to have working people, stick up for each other. And that's disgraceful. That really is disgraceful to me.